I think before we jump in, I just wanted to give folks an overview of sort of the general arc of our conversation so that you have a sense of you burning questions of whether or not we might be addressing those burning questions as we go, and really encourage you to start dropping questions in the chat as they come up for you. So for our conversation, hoping, Chris, to spend some time exploring your background, then moving into this think like a hacker mentality and how it relates to the CodePath course that you designed for us. And then finally thinking about how to hack a cyber career and think really about those early career stages and the advice that you have for folks in our audience who are in that boat. So without further ado, are you feeling ready, Chris? Should we jump in?
Ready. And I also am very happy and grateful to be here, and grateful for everyone to showing up and for their time and attention. So really excited.
Awesome. Yeah, and huge shout out to folks who are already blowing up the chat. Please keep doing that. Also shout out, I have a few former students in the audience. I'm so glad you're here. Okay, here we go. Chris, I would love to start off by, you have such an impressive background, and I would love to trace it back to you getting your start in software engineering and getting into this space. I know a lot of folks in our audience are in that similar space. So take us into the start of your journey in tech and what that looked like for you.
Yeah, so the start of my journey, it started really early for me. It started probably before I was 10 years old. I was lucky enough to be there kind of at the dawn of the digital age, and grew up with computers and worked with them, you know, really all through my education. And then by the time I was in high school, I was, you know, repairing computers and doing a lot of hardware work, and did a lot of freelancing throughout college and afterward. And then I started working as a programmer eventually in my 20s, and did mostly back-end development and, you know, kind of enterprise software development for a good long while. And then a few years ago, really just started getting more into application development, and particularly mobile development. Took a CodePath course on iOS mobile development that was really just an amazing experience. Helped me learn a lot about this area that I didn't know that much about, and really became a big fan of the CodePath model. And so I was delighted to start working with them eventually. And moved into cybersecurity relatively recently in my career, working with CodePath and other clients, developing training for engineers, and in some cases not engineers, to you know, kind of explore this wonderful, crazy world of cybersecurity through the lens of offensive security. So it's been a journey, and I think I was really fortunate to be in a time and place where I was able to grow alongside, you know, the digital revolution and the internet itself, and I feel very fortunate that I was in that position.
Awesome, thank you. And I love hearing about CodePath alumni stories and the ethos of giving back to this community, and just wanted to really appreciate the way that you've, you know, taken a CodePath course, but also given so much back to our community. It feels so resonant with our ethos.
It's just a wonderful model, and I found just a mission that I could really believe in with CodePath, and the way the courses are structured, the way the access to information is presented, and then the kind of mission of bringing it to as many people as possible, especially those who might not otherwise be exposed to it. Really just a big believer in that, and happy to be a part of the community.
And it makes me really excited to get into in a little bit, get into the ways that you've, you know, started to design courses with our students in mind. Before we do that, I would love to think through, you know, in your career, it hasn't been linear. It sounds like you've, you know, switched into iOS and eventually switched into cybersecurity. And I would love to think back to like those. Oftentimes I find that changes are precipitated by these inflection points and really important moments in our lives. And so wondering if there's a few moments for you in your career that stand out to you as big inflection points and big change points.
Yeah, definitely. I can actually remember the first one really well. When I was a child, my first encounter with a computer was an IBM PC Junior, and this was in the 1980s, and this was the age before user interfaces. So there was the age before hard drives were released. So you had one floppy that ran the software and another floppy that you put your data on. And I remember sitting in front of a DOS prompt, the old style C:\\/ prompt, and just typing in random things, random words, and I would get bad command or file name, bad command or file name. And I just remember doing this for hours, really. And then at some point I guessed the right combination of letters. And I think I typed in dir and I got a directory listing. And it was just like, oh, I have created fire. It was this amazing moment of resonance, and probably my first, real hacking experience in that sense. So that was a really special moment, and I still remember it all these years later. I remember, working on hardware during summers in high school and building computers for my father's friends and helping repair people's computers, and really having a sense of kind of being in the weeds and being able to do this in a way that was lucrative and got a lot of gratitude from people that were otherwise really intimidated by these still then relatively new machines. A big moment was going from freelancer to actually being employed. My first kind of real programming job, and all of the legitimacy that suddenly fell on me at that moment was really interesting to kind of go from this very, on my own freelance kind of path to something that felt all of a sudden very formal and very, almost hyper legitimate. Since we're talking about cybersecurity, there's one real inflection point that stands out, and this happened more recently. So as I said, I spent most of my career as a back-end developer, enterprise software developer. And some years ago, I was in a relationship, and that relationship ended badly. And my ex worked with somebody to hack into my system so that she could spy on me. This went on for some time, and it ended up being a really difficult part of my life. And a lot of different emotions came up when this happened, and one of them, kind of when the dust settled a little bit, one of them was just this really burning curiosity. Like, how did this happen? How could this have possibly happened? I was a career software developer. I thought I knew a thing or two. So it was really humbling to have this experience, and so this fueled really powerful learning experience. I just set out to find out all of the ways that my systems could be compromised, and I spent really a very intensive year just kind of really just delineating all of the ways that my really small digital footprint and my really kind of small digital world could be compromised. And I was stunned at how many there were. I was also really stunned at the fact that all of the standard advice that we get, good advice like using a password manager, not reusing passwords, using two-factor authentication, not putting too much of our life online, not clicking links in emails, all of that had gotten through, and I was doing all of that. Didn't make a difference. Absolutely didn't make a difference at all. It maybe saved it from being a little bit worse, but in terms of my own digital world being completely compromised, and none of that stuff helped. And none of the resources that I found were really geared toward someone in my position. A lot of what I found about security was really oriented toward the corporate world, toward the enterprise world, not toward end users, and certainly not toward people who were the victim of the style of attack. So this really prompted just a ton of learning. I tell people a lot, find the part of this that you're passionate about, because that's going to drive the learning. I usually don't tell people that one definition of the word passion is suffering. So I recommend, I wouldn't recommend this or wish this on anybody, but it did really turn out to be impetus for a very, very educational year. By the end of this year, I had a hardware firewall set up. I had a little test lab set up. I probably had 20 different USB sticks with different versions of Kali or Tails or other, operating systems. And I was really, really in deep. So Another thing that this experience really gave me was empathy for other people who go through this, the vast majority of whom are women. It's really unusual, I think, for a man to be a victim of this type of cybercrime. So it really gave me an opportunity to connect with people that I wouldn't have connected with otherwise, and hear their stories. And even though I haven't spoken about this publicly until recently, still a number of people have found me through the grapevine. And I've spoken to them about their experience, and they have nowhere to go. They have no one to reach out to, and they really need somebody to talk to, someone who will believe them. And so it really created a lot of empathy for me, for the people who typically get compromised by this type of attack, and often in circumstances far worse than mine. So that, if we're talking about cybersecurity, it's hard to imagine a more dramatic inflection point than that one.
Yeah, and I just want to thank you so much for the vulnerability to share a truly very violating and terrifying experience. Because I think it's hard to talk about, and even harder to take that experience and use it for good, and use it to inform other people. And so just a huge, moment of gratitude to you for sharing and being vulnerable in that way.
Thank you.
Um,
Thank you.
I I want to think about for a moment. I know you mentioned that, and I'm still sort of gonna just take a deep breath myself, because I think there's some emotions that come up when we think about our space, any of our space, but our digital space in particular being violated. So for folks out there who are feeling maybe the similar rush of anxiety that hearing about this experience inspires, um, I'm curious, like, any advice that you have for folks who want to be more aware of, or maybe are going through a similar. I know you mentioned that some of the resources you found aren't great, but I'm curious if there are learnings or lessons or things that have been helpful for you as you've been going on this journey post this experience.
Yeah, it's really it's sad that I don't have really solid advice that I can give people that have been through this. The most helpful thing the thing that would have been most helpful to me is what I try to give to other people, which is just a sympathetic ear. Listen to them, believe them, hear their stories, and kind of break down the situation. And that usually dictates specific recommendations about actions to take. But the situations are so varied. Some people are is still in relationships or in living situations with their abuser and can't extricate themselves from that. And the advice for that person is going to be different than it will be for somebody who was attacked by a stalker or an ex that they have some amount of physical distance from. And there are no really great resources that are aware of, or really solid resources at all that I'm aware of that I can send people to. There are a few people out there whose work on this I really admire. One of them, her name is Eva Galperin. She is, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. She's the head of security for EFF, and she's written a lot about this. She's worked with certain antivirus providers to make sure that this type of software, which is often available off the shelf, is recognized by antivirus programs. And she's talked a lot about how when this type of attack happens, these digital devices are largely extensions of our mind, and so it's incredibly violating. So I listen to people like that who are much more involved in the industry at a higher level, that are working to create change. And as far as if anyone is listening to this who is experiencing a situation like this, or knows someone, the best I can do is say, you can reach out to me directly. And we can have a conversation about it. You can send me an email, chris@codepath.org. And we can have a conversation about it. And I'm sadly, that's the best I can offer. But that's what I really kind of wish that I'd had when this happened. And so that's what I try to give other people.
I appreciate that, Chris. And I'm seeing a conversation happen in the chat. Thanks, folks who captured the spelling of Eva Galperin's name so that we can all begin to, follow her work more closely, and folks who were brave enough to share in the chat that they've experienced something similar. I know, Chris, that one of the big outcomes, in addition, to the to taking care of yourself, to connecting with other folks, has been to really start to develop this think like a hacker mindset and develop educational resources for CodePath to help folks better educate themselves and begin to create maybe some of the resources that the world needs more of. So I would love to begin to dig into, if we're thinking about this Intro to Cybersecurity course coming from the think like a hacker mindset that we're hoping to dig into, I'd love for you to give us a sense of, what is this think like a hacker mindset, first of all, and sort of how did that develop, and how does it inform the materials that you developed for CodePath's Intro to Cybersecurity course?
Yeah, so it's, so much of it is really subversive. And it's really a subversion of kind of what I think of as the standard contract in software development. So if you're studying to be an engineer, or if you are an engineer, there are kind of prescribed paths and models and patterns that you follow, and they're all basically based on this idea that people are going to use your software in the way that you intend them to use it. Now, they will often find edge cases and bugs that you weren't aware of, but generally they'll find those by kind of stumbling around or doing something accidentally. But so much of our digital world rests on this assumption that people are basically going to do what we expect them to do with what we build. And so the hacker mindset just completely disregards that and realizes that rather than being this really solid foundation, that proposition is really porous and empty, and it's really much more of a house of cards than I think any of us would like to believe. And so really understanding that and internalizing that in a way that like imagine a thief going into a store. The thief is probably going to be paying attention to all kinds of things that most of us ignore, like where the security cameras are, where the exits are, how many employees are working, and what parts of the store they can see, and kind of where the shadows and the hidden parts are. And even if the thief is just going for a gallon of milk, it's like an automatic process that's running in the thief's mind. They're kind of they can't get out of this mode. So it's that kind of subversive mindset where you're looking for the ways that this grand assumption about the purpose of software and how it is used can be subverted or bypassed. And a lot of the kind of assumptions on which we proceed as engineers, especially when we're learning, especially when we are in the more formative stages of our careers, are just complete. You can almost invert them to really see qualities that hackers use. One of the ones that a lot of us as engineers, we have this respect inculcated into us for the vast body of knowledge in which we are engaged. To learn how to be really good at engineering is a lifelong pursuit, and even to study it is a really formidable proposition. And most of us, when we get into it, we are really intimidated by all of the things that we need to learn, all of the knowledge that we need to engage in. And there's almost a sense of, I can't even do anything until I study this for a long time, until I've really explored all of these different we see this kind of mountain of knowledge before us. Hackers don't care about any of that. They will surgically plunge into the depths of a very complicated body of knowledge, grab the one little nugget of functionality or information that they need, and go right back up and move on to the next thing. So there isn't this enormous respect that can that respect that can kind of intimidate us and even really prevent us from taking risks. That's completely subverted. And so I think you can find, even though hacking and engineering obviously share a lot of commonalities, You can find these particular qualities that good engineers have that are really almost just directly inverted and mapped to qualities that really good hackers have. And so it's this highly kind of subversive mindset that doesn't take for granted a lot of the assumptions upon which we as engineers or as even just end users of technology take for granted.
That that resonates a lot, especially I think um, I'm thinking about how much I trust the applications that I use, but also as a developer, trust the various APIs and pieces that I'm engaged with as well. I'm curious, I know the CodePath course takes a really offensive lens to cybersecurity. Students are practicing exploiting vulnerabilities within, of course, the safe confines of our curriculum. Um, but I'm curious, what's the choice? I haven't seen that many cybersecurity curricula that really focus on offensive exploitation and understanding it deeply. And I'm curious about that choice in the design of the course.
Well, and originally, the course that we designed was kind of half of it was defensive and half of it was offensive. So in the original course, we had students building a web application in PHP, a very basic kind of secured web application, multi-user. And then we would teach them how to hack it, and then teach them how to fix those vulnerabilities, and then teach them how to get around those vulnerabilities, and then teach them how to, fix the vulnerabilities and the vulnerabilities. And so we kind of had kind of a red team, blue team kind of side to it. What we found is that the offensive material, the lessons learned from the offensive material had better transferability than the lessons learned from the defensive material, because the defensive education was based really strongly on, or really deeply tied up in what type of language, what type of development paradigm. A lot of things, a lot of the vulnerabilities that were introduced were vulnerabilities that would have been addressed with a more sophisticated or mature platform. So the defensive techniques weren't teaching as much about the real problem as the offensive techniques. They weren't really driving a lot of interest or as much interest as the offensive techniques. Because we had to take a lot of time to really get some students up to speed with web development in general, or PHP web development if they had worked in something else like Java. PHP isn't necessarily intuitive to someone who's not experienced with it. So a lot of the time the course was kind of eaten up in learning how to build so that you could really get to the security content. Whereas the offensive content, you really, a lot can be learned just through a browser, just through a browser in an input form. And different kind of levels of sophistication and subtlety. And so when we moved to more kind of purely offensive, we were able to go much deeper with those different vulnerabilities and exploits, and show people more of just how sophisticated it gets, and just kind of the creative leaps that are required to actually exploit some of these vulnerabilities at a higher level. That seemed to really lock in the lesson more and creates more of this mindset of so even though we don't have the defensive coding techniques now aren't as emphasized, it's still, if you go through a dozen exercises about how to exfiltrate an entire MySQL database through one input form, and you see a dozen different ways that can happen, then when you go back to your job building web applications, you will have that in your mind. You have learned that lesson viscerally when you put one of those input forms on a page that's connected to a database. It's a visceral kind of learning of the lesson that really stays with you. My own education as a software developer came with a certain amount of defensive coding. A lot of those lessons they didn't get through. A lot of stuff that came to me was stuff from ethical hacks, penetration test reports, and they didn't make sense to me. It's like, why do they want me to change this one thing? Because I couldn't really see the big picture of, yes, it's just one thing, but if it's coupled with 3 or 4 other things, then all of a sudden we have a serious vulnerability. And a lot of the techniques that I use to overcome those are now kind of out of date because they were wedded to the specific platform, language, web development paradigm that I was working with. Whereas the techniques to exploit them are still, in many cases, very relevant and still even used today. And as I said, the other thing is it really galvanizes interest. There's something really fascinating about this kind of subversive process, and I think it's a way in. Even though it is, when you kind of think about the entire world of security and all of the possible paths in the field, we are teaching through a very specific, narrow lens of offensive security, and really just offensive security as it applies to networked applications. It really allows us to go deep enough with this one particular vein that we can engage interest and really cultivate a little bit of that hacker mindset.
Well, and I think that that's a great segue towards this sort of career lens. And I agree. I think what you're saying really resonates from, a lot of my backgrounds in education, and really resonates with this idea that, we need to actually see the whole picture and see the problem before we can begin to solve it. It's not enough to tell people you need to encrypt your application. And they will, but they might miss some of the actual vulnerabilities if they don't understand what problems might arise or what hackers might be trying to do. I think as we think about then, we've got our hacker mindset, we've gone through CodePath security course, we're feeling great, we're interested in cybersecurity. I think for a lot of us, the field can be, at least for me, it can be a little bit intimidating. And maybe that comes from shows like Mr. Robot. You've got somebody in a hoodie in their basement, and they're, typing into a blank terminal with those green letters, and they're typing things that definitely aren't words, and it seems like they're just guessing letters, right? Like that's the image that comes to my mind. One, is that what it's like to work in cybersecurity? And if not, can you help us start to paint a picture of, what are we talking about when we say this cybersecurity professional space? What might that look like for some of the folks who are interested in going into this field?
Yeah, that archetypal image of the hacker in the hoodie, the Mr. Robot type. That show in particular is interesting because they took great pains in that show to show very realistic hacks. And almost everything shown in the series that at least as far as I watched it was actually very realistic, and so they get a lot of credit for that. And yet, I don't think it's really representative of what it looks like to work in cybersecurity. At least, the people that I follow and that I look up to, there's no resemblance there. I think there's a kind of, again, the course that we have is showing this one particular avenue of offensive security, and there is a career path that maps to. Penetration tester, in some cases, a researcher, but I would say of the whole kind of sphere of cybersecurity careers, those are just a small part and a pretty exclusive one. So there are more different paths in cybersecurity now than I think we could even really delineate here. And so, more than just a penetration tester or even just a pure researcher, there are people, working things like risk management and assessment. There are people working on things like data forensic, incident response, governance, compliance. There are a whole bunch of different paths. And even within the pen tester community, I read something the other day from a pen tester, and she said, if you don't like Excel and PowerPoint and don't like writing reports and doing presentations, you won't like being a pen tester, because that's 70 or 80% of my job. There isn't a lot of the work of a pen tester is really communicating what they have found, and doing so, in a way that engenders receptivity. It can be very difficult to go to a stakeholder and say, your thing is broken, and you have to really be good at communication. So there are a lot of room for soft skills in the security field, and they're really important. They don't get the headlines. They don't get they don't have the same sex appeal as the Mr. Robot kind of stuff, but they are really important. And to me, they are making a much bigger difference because it's, demystifying a lot of it. It is creating a lot more awareness. It is reaching people that normally don't think about security, even people that work in technology that view security as an afterthought or something that, gets addressed, by this other team doing this other thing, and it doesn't really have anything to do with design or building. So there are many careers, many different career paths that look nothing like, the stereotype we have of a hacker, or even the stereotype that we might have of the person that the hacker is working against, this kind of corporate, stodgy, stuffy, not creative kind of corporate person is helpless in the face of the hacker. It doesn't bear a lot of resemblance to reality. At least the part that I see. The people that I look up to and I follow, as I said, they are really great with soft skills as well as technical skills. They're really great communicators. They're really great about reaching people and raising awareness in very targeted ways and actually making a difference, moving the needle. So yeah, that's a really good point, because even though our course really emphasizes this material and it's really fun and engaging, and it, I think, does help cultivate this mindset that is really useful in a lot of these career paths, even when you're not using these or doing this kind of exploit work directly. Yeah, it's just it's a little bit of a narrow slice, and it's good to be aware that there are just a lot of different paths. As I said, we could probably spend the rest of the time just kind of delineating them and talking about all the different ways to get involved and make a difference.
And I love this emphasis that, we started our conversation talking about, being on a victim of a cyber crime and sort of the profound implications that has on people's lives. And I love that we've come full circle to the fact that it also, because cybercrime exists, it also means there's a huge opportunity to make a difference in the lives of people who have experiences, or we may be preventing from experiencing things like this. So I really appreciate the emphasis on, like, this is a way for us to make a difference in our communities as much as it's a way to make a career and build a life for ourselves as well.
Yeah, remembering that people are on the other end of the things that we build. And I think that's something that's really gotten lost in a lot of our public discourse, especially, but in the way that we build things, remembering that people are always on the other side of what we're doing is really helpful. So I think underscoring that point is really worthwhile.
Yeah. One question that came up, Chris, was you were referencing people who you look up to and admire in the field. I don't know if these are public personalities, like people you follow on Twitter, and if you're able to name a few. That was one question in the chat that I think folks are interested in.
Yes, I mentioned Eva Galperin, and apologies to her if I'm mispronouncing her name. I don't know her personally, but I followed her work for a while now, and really like a lot of the things that she has to say. Another person that I do know and have had the privilege of working with is Alex Stamos, who has a really just legendary career in the field, and is very active, online and sharing his thoughts, and really engages. One of the things that I really admire about Alex is he has a lot of skin in the game. He has put a lot of his own career on the line and worked for companies that it's very easy to criticize, like Facebook. And he's actually been there and you know, as I say, has skin in the game, and so his opinions carry a lot of weight with me. And I also, you know, had the privilege of working with him a few years ago, and really got a lot out of that experience. So those are two people that I would mention.
Awesome, thank you. And we have, I'm mindful of time and sad because there's so many things that I personally would like to know, but I know I can't hog your attention and time forever. So I think we have time for one more question before we open it up to the audience. And I think the question that feels really important on my mind, and I'm going to try to make this um, broad, I think. You've mentioned that you were later in coming to the cybersecurity space, and I know for some of our students, maybe they don't have cybersecurity courses at their university. Maybe some of our recent grads are thinking about making a switch. And I know there can be a fear of like, oh, am I a late bloomer? Do I belong here? There's probably a decent amount of imposter syndrome tied up in that sense of like, maybe I'm late to the game. What advice do you have for folks who are maybe wondering that either because of their late comer, late bloomer status or some other part of maybe I don't fit with this image of a hacker or a cybersecurity expert? What advice do you have for folks who are sort of grappling with that imposter syndrome?
Yeah, it's real. I have that. I have that right now. You know, I have that. You know, it's something that is there to one degree or another. I definitely a late bloomer. I wasn't involved professionally in cybersecurity until after age 40. So um, you know, which which is close to the heat death of developers if you check on, you know, places like Hacker News. So yeah, and I, because of this, realistically, I will never catch up with people who've been doing this since they were, you know, 15, working strictly in security, doing hacking the whole time. There are, you know, always going to be many people that I'm looking up to that I would just won't catch up to. But there is still room for what I do. I mentioned Alex Stamos, and you know, so I had the honor of working with him a few years ago to bring a version of the course that we teach at CodePath to Stanford. But he wanted it for to teach this to public policy graduate students that were not engineers. So these were people that in many cases had never opened a terminal before. That, you know, that had and we were taking them, you know, not only into terminal but having them, you know, SSH into machines and you know, run Metasploit and you know, and really just doing some very technical stuff. And it was just a real pleasure to do that. But I, you know, talk about imposter syndrome, stepping foot on the Stanford campus with Alex, who, you know, probably knows 3,000 or 4,000 people more qualified than I am to teach cybersecurity. So I, you know, I have to realize that I had to realize that you know, I had this particular gift to offer, this particular thing that I could bring, and a lot of it involved bridging the gap between, you know, knowledge that I could access because of my background and because of what I'd studied, and bridging the gap between that and what these students could access in order to give them a real view into what this is like, in order to actually take them into the tall grass and show them, you know, this is kind of how this is done. This is what it looks like. And it's not as hard or intimidating as you think it is. So it was a real honor to do that, but I did have to overcome my own, you know, kind of imposter syndrome to do that and kind of get out of my own way. So that is a really, I think, big thing that stops a lot of people, that intimidation. So when I talk about the hacker mindset, one of the qualities that hackers have is just this fearlessness, this absolute fearlessness about going into, you know, applications or paradigms or, you know, places where, you know, the level of knowledge required to really access it would shut a lot of us out. We'd have a healthy respect for how much is needed to actually go there, and hackers don't have that healthy respect. They have this kind of fearlessness. Another quality is creativity, kind of an ingenuity. And really, you know, the subversiveness that I talked about before. All of those qualities can be cultivated. They can all be learned. They can all be discovered within oneself. And you can do that as a way of counteracting this intimidation, and really seeing that, like, again, this intimidation is connected to structures and assumptions that look solid until you really look closely at them, and then you see they're more porous. And that applies to not just software, but to the industry in general. You can apply the hacker mindset to entering this industry, and you can see a lot of the kind of the gates to this industry aren't as solid or impenetrable as they might seem, if you are believing all the assumptions that we have about them. So I think cultivating these qualities of bringing a lot of creativity, cultivating some fearlessness, persistence. That's one other quality of the hacker mindset, is they just don't quit. The difference between a really great hacker and just a good one is often how stubborn the really great one is, by just keeping at it. And so you can often boil it down to, okay, well, how many no's will you get before you walk away? If somebody gets if somebody tries to do something and gets the answer no 50 times, they'll walk away and do something else, whereas another person might take 100 no's or 500 no's, and then they'll get the yes eventually. So these kind of qualities, I think they can be cultivated, they can be nourished, and they can be brought to bear, not just in terms of technology, but in terms of how we engage with the industry and do things like find a job. And they can be used to directly overcome things like intimidation and imposter syndrome, in the sense that we're locked out. So that's what I'd really want to say is, this is for you. To everybody out there listening to this path is open to you. I mentioned that when I was young, that image of me with the DOS prompt just kind of typing things. I got a lot of messages that computers were open for me as a path. And a lot of people that I grew up with didn't get those messages because they were a young girl instead of a young boy, or they were a young minority instead of a young white boy, and they didn't get the same messages that I got. So if I could do anything, it would be to give people that message of, this is for you, this is open to you. And even more than that, kind of as we look at the moment that we're in right now, which is kind of a dark moment in terms of our public discourse, and we see a lot of the negative effects of the kind of the technological world that we've built. It's more than just that it's open to you. You're needed. Your creativity is needed, your skills are needed, your hard work is needed, your caring is needed. So take that if you can, as you navigate the ocean of obstacles and intimidation and fear, uncertainty, and doubt that are going to confront anyone trying to break into technology in general, or security in particular. Hold to that if you can, because it's open to you, and you are needed.
I'm feeling such a sense of calm in a truly turbulent time from hearing that message. And I think especially one of the pieces I'm latching onto is the idea that fearlessness can be cultivated and creativity can be cultivated, that it's not our last chance to learn things, and it's not our last chance to tackle our fears ever. And that it just, yeah. Thank you, Chris. We have 146 people who have stuck with us, who I'm sure have burning questions for you. So really excited to turn it over to folks to voice your questions. I'm going to take a quick scroll through the chat while we have our first question. If you have a question, I imagine that the hand raise in the participants window might be a great way to signal that. And I see that Anna Taylor has the first question, or the first hand raised, it looks like. So Anna, can I have you kick off the questions while I take a quick scroll through the chat?
Yes, hi. Hi, everyone. Taylor, Chris, thank you so much for this time and workshop. Chris, big fan of cybersecurity. I'm actually, cybersecurity major in City College of New York, here in New York.
Great.
I had a question actually about, about jobs in cybersecurity. I find that a lot of, a lot of employers kind of looking for those programming skills, and many times like fundamentals, like networking, or missing kind of IP, or maybe deeper understanding like of OSI model. And kind of like when we go into details of like virtualization and just kind of like understanding how to intercept that signal, like what would be your I'd say recommendations? Because like myself personally, sometimes I look at a lot of code every day, and I feel like sometimes I'm like, am I wasting my time doing that? Should I be doing something else more? Because then I want to go, and it's like, but I have to do this. I have to go back to parrot. Like I want to exploit more. I wanna, like do like ether rape or whatever other tools, and kind of want to know all of the commands, because I feel like if I don't know the commands and I go to a recruiter, and they be like, oh, but you don't know this. And I just kind of like, you have to know everything. And in your cybersecurity course, there's and I'm sorry for talking so long, but it was just a little kind of like a pen testing, and then like honeypot in the end projects, which were like really amazing. But what would be your recommendations? Because it's like you can't be everywhere, it's like,
Right. Yeah. Well,
yeah.
so that's one thing to start with, is that you can't be everywhere. You have to prioritize. Um, you mentioned recruiter. I wouldn't look at the recruiter. The recruiter is one of the gatekeepers that you're kind of moving through, and they're often acting on information that they're getting from an employer. So who I would look at are the people doing the job that you want to do. It sounds like you're interested in research. So you could look at a researcher, and really kind of follow people that are doing this professionally. A lot of them are publishing what they're doing. So a lot of researchers will publish a write-up about an exploit. This is something that I love to do. I love to read one of these write-ups of an exploit and see how far I can get before I cry uncle, in terms of technical difficulty. But as I'm going through, I'm looking up things I don't know. If I'm recreating the exploit, I'm learning just enough about a networking in order to facilitate me moving through the example. So what I would do is find the people who are doing what you aspire to do, the kind of job that you want to get. Try to really understand what their work looks like, the skills that they're using. Learn enough of that so that you can follow what they do to the extent that they publish someone or publish their work. To the extent that you can, reach out to them, try to develop a relationship with people in terms of reaching out and asking them for advice. Most people I know are very happy to share advice about their work, and especially with beginners. And take an attitude of, okay, I'm going to learn what I need to learn to access this, to really develop this or follow this thread of research that I'm really interested in. I'm not going to come out of it being a TCP/IP expert. I'm not going to come out of it being fluent in assembly, but I'm going to learn just enough to follow along and recreate this for myself, or even write intelligently about it, which can be a great way to learn. Those are the people I think that either going to be closer to what you're actually going to end up doing. They are going to be closer to the people who make the final decision about whether or not you're hired. Recruiters, and even to an extent, people in like HR departments aren't always operating on, or aren't operating from that kind of expertise. They're understand enough to kind of screen. It's by all means listen to them, but I find that really connecting, if you can, directly or indirectly with people who are actually doing the work you want to do and emulating them. And again, setting aside the idea that you need to be comprehensive in these fields. that's a more helpful approach. Does that help?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Anna. I'm seeing a question that got seconded quite a few times in chat, but I also am seeing some answers of suggestions to have employers pay for certifications. The question was about, how to go from some of the self-taught techniques and platforms available to practice to move towards a career, and certifications came up in that process. Jeffrey, I might pass the question to you next. I know that you were next with your hand up. So we can let some of this chat conversation unfold. But I would love the chance to read through it so we can get a sense of how popular that question is. But Jeffrey, over to you, and then we'll come back to the certifications question.
All right, thank you, Taylor. Thank you, Chris, for sharing your experiences and your story. I love how the story of you growing up to having an interest in computers. I was the same way. I had a huge interest in computers growing up. And even then, I went through my college career learning about all the different possible majors that I wanted to major in. And ultimately, I decided to pick up data science, and I was a self-learner, and even then it was really difficult. So I just wanted to know, like, how did you really learn how to build those fundamental skills in understanding and grasping the cybersecurity essentials that are needed within the field?
Yeah, I'm mostly self-taught myself. In fact, really entirely self-taught. The work has taught me. The people that I've worked with have taught me. This is similar to the answer I just gave. I've looked at the people that I'm whose work I'm most interested in, whose work most moves me, and have sought to emulate them. And I've been fairly ruthless about finding the subset of knowledge within these different skill sets that's needed to open up access. And again, letting go of a kind of need to have it all in my mind or be an expert in any of it. I'm not sure if that's answering your question, but yeah, it's about, you have a finite amount of time, you have more interest than you will have time to feed all those interests. So you really have to be a little bit ruthless about saying, okay, I'm going to learn this. I'm going to learn this to a depth that is really empowering to me. That lets me get work done, because that's what people listen to in the end. That's I think what moves the needle is accomplishing something, bringing something of value. And if people are seeing that, they're going to be much more interested in working with somebody who can demonstrate that than even someone who ticks all of the boxes of particular skill sets. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and I know it's kind of out of the blue, but even though I started off as a self-learning in data science, I attended this webinar about cybersecurity. And transitioning over to cybersecurity, would there be any major differences or any skill gaps that would be required to learn in order to excel within this field?
It will really depend on the specific path within the field. It's almost unhelpful to talk about cybersecurity as a whole anymore, because there are just so many different paths. And so yeah, it really depends on the role that you're transitioning to. If you transition to a role like data forensics, there might be more transference there. There might be less of a gap for you there. But if you transferred into something like risk management, then you'd have to learn a lot about procedures and the various kind of models and approaches to risk management. So there will be paths within cybersecurity that you find are closer to you in terms of a lower gap, but those might not be the parts that you're interested in. You might be interested in doing something like pen testing, and that might come with a larger gap. So you have to really get clear about what the role is. Find people who do that. Again, this is kind of the same answer. Find people who are actually doing it and talking about it online. Reach out to them if you can. And that will give you a really clear sense of, okay, I need to be really solid with this. I need to learn enough of this other thing to get the work done. And then this other thing isn't really relevant to this particular role. So if you're thinking about cybersecurity as a whole, it really can be intimidating and paralyzing because you feel like you have to, really learn everything. But we don't really have generalists like that anymore. We're not making new ones anyway. We're making specialists right now. And so find the role, find people actually doing that. That will give you a much better sense of the skills that are needed, to what degree that they're needed, and what the gap between where your current skill set is and those skills. And you might be surprised that you're further along in some areas, and you also might decide that you want something that's a little bit further away that causes you to stretch more, and that's going to mean more learning on your part by getting really clear about what that is based on the role that you want.
Thank you, Chris.
You're welcome.
And Chris, one question from the chat that I think piles onto that a little bit is just advice for connecting with cybersecurity experts in the field. You're interested in the field. It's an enormous field. You maybe want to get a better sense of the roles that are out there. Are there places that you've found these folks who are publishing? Where do you look for folks? How do you reach out? How do you connect? What advice do you have for making those connections?
Yeah, one of the best ways, I think, the people who are getting into really productive conversations are people who are actually publishing work, even if that work, what they're publishing is about their learning voyage. So, as you're learning, you can blog about what you're learning, and people see that and they want to help, they want to engage. So that's one thing to one approach that can really help, even in the beginning, even as you're still learning, especially if you have this idea that I don't know enough to blog about this. That's especially who I'm talking to. Learn about something, then write about it, which is a really great way to solidify and consolidate that knowledge. In terms of finding people, InfoSec Twitter is really cool. There are a lot of people on Twitter that in security that are talking about their roles and what's going on right now. And as you can imagine, they never run out of stuff to talk about. And you can really probably spend more time than you should reading the feeds of security Twitter and what they're talking about. And in many cases, if you are sincere and you reach out to them, they will respond and engage. And I think that, especially if they see that, oh, this person has a blog, okay, this person's just starting out, they're trying to learn, that makes people want to help even more. So I'd say that. And that's, I think, also sound advice for landing a position that you don't always hear. But beyond the resume, having kind of a like for engineers, we know that our resume is GitHub more than it is LinkedIn, but as part of that GitHub, publishing work about what you're doing and your thoughts about what you're doing, even if you're a beginner, especially if you're a beginner, that can really break the ice in a big way. And that can be a great calling card. So I recommend that. What the certification question is a big one. So I'll just address that really quickly. You will get a lot of different opinions about certifications. You will talk to a lot of people or hear a lot of people saying they just don't matter. They won't ever make the difference. You have to consider the source, first of all. So like, somebody like me, giving someone advice based on, I'm 25 years into my career, I've got experience to fall back on, I've got a network to fall back on. And so maybe certifications aren't as important to me or somebody, in my position. But if you are a college graduate and you don't have experience, getting a certification it's not going to hurt. You don't need to be obsessive about it, and you need to be selective about which certification you go for. There are some that are respected very well, and then probably more of them that are not as respected. You don't need to, I think, get that many of them, but it can certainly help, and you can learn a lot. So if you can get both of those, something else to put on the resume while you're, trying to get your first big job, and something that will help you learn and consolidate knowledge, I think those can be useful. So yeah, you don't need to go overboard. Be selective about the certification, but also, listen to advice, but consider the source of the advice you're getting. If someone who has a really established career is telling you, yeah, certs don't matter, it won't make a difference. Well, it might not get you the job, but it can't hurt. And that person might be a little bit out of touch with what it's like to be, a 21-year-old with no experience really trying to get a job, or somebody who's trying to switch from one subfield to another. So consider the source when you hear a lot of this advice. That's my best take. We don't have a really good answer on certifications, but yeah.
Thanks, Chris. I think we have time for 2 more questions. And I want to say a huge thank you. We'll do this at the end too, but I know, Chris, you've been talking for an hour plus straight. This is so informative for me, and I know for all the 135 folks that have stuck with us. Ethan, you get the second to last question, and then I'll close us out with one last one.
Gotcha. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. First of all, Chris, thank you so much for your story and about all that information. I actually had a question about the certification, so that definitely helped a lot. So as someone who's transitioning from software engineering as a college senior to cybersecurity, it's really interesting to see that intersectionality between the two disciplines. I know that you are a software developer and you are an engineer. So what would you recommend is the best way to determine like a specific field you want to get into within cybersecurity? And for example, like for penetration testing, forensic analysis, or security analysis, what do you think is the best way to go about realizing what you want to do?
Okay.
Yeah.
So we would start by kind of taking a survey approach and reading widely, really kind of read widely from all of the different disciplines, and then watch your own reaction to that. So if you send me, I don't want to bias anyone here, but if you send me a write-up about someone who is a researcher who is reversing malware and wrote up a really detailed blog about how the malware works and the specific exploit used and what the reversal can tell us about who wrote the malware, I will, stay up until 1 or 2 in the morning trying to get through this. And, as I'm going, I'm looking up terms and I'm looking at these, hex dumps of the disassembler that have been posted and really just feel over my head, over my head, but I love it. And all of a sudden I'm way past my bedtime. If you send me an article about risk management, a really, really well-written article about risk management, I will be falling asleep after 10 minutes. So I can kind of tell that, risk management, it's important, it's vital. I'm deeply grateful to the people who do it because it's really important for all of us. But it's not a field that lights my fire. So as you read, as you go through and read, samplings from across the field, you can get a sense of what, really kind of ignites your interest. Make notes of those. And then, when you find something like that, try to find 2 or 3 more things that are very similar to that and see if that interest proves out. And if you can put together, a handful, even something like 3 to 5 of these little niche areas, I think if you kind of stand back and take a look at that, you will start to understand what path is opening for you in terms of interest. The interest is so vital because that's what drives the learning. There's no amount of external kind of motivation that's really going to get you to learn at the depth that you need to learn in order to be successful. So it has to be intrinsic. It has to really come from this kind of deep interest. And you can notice that. You can notice when you're staying up later than you should, or when you're reading something, about a security topic when you should be doing something else. You can see kind of where your interest pulls you. And if you kind of read widely and investigate a lot of different areas, and then watch your reaction to that, I think you will start to accumulate these kind of trailheads into the territory. And then you go, oh, I'm really kind of interested in this peer research, angle. This is the stuff that really, really drives me. And you give a little bit more time and attention to it, and you see if that proves out and develops into something that you think, well, I could really take this far. I'm really, interested in it to the point that it doesn't feel like work. It doesn't feel like, I don't have to force myself to do this. It's kind of moving on its own. Is that helpful?
That is very helpful. And I think you can kind of see the nervousness when I was asking that question. So thank you for kind of calming my nerves there.
Glad to.
Yeah.
Glad to. Thank you for the question.
Amazing. And Ethan, I'm right there with you. Speaking in front of 130 people isn't a normal daily occurrence for me either. So with, I think the last piece, Chris, before and I know folks had a lot of really wonderful questions. I want to give a huge shout out to anyone that answered a question in the chat. Thank you for doing that. Chris, we're so grateful for your expertise, and also super grateful for the expertise of everyone in our community. I think it's what makes CodePath so powerful, ultimately, is that we're powered by our community. The last question, which is kind of flippant, Chris, but is, I think, a fun one to dig into for a moment, is corporate cybersecurity fun? Like, we've talked a lot about individual security.
Yeah.
Curious about this whole corporate security world and your take.
I think it can be. It can also be not fun. I don't think I would have a lot of fun doing risk management at the corporate level. Again, much gratitude to the people who do that. I'm very glad that they are out there and that they're passionate about that. But it's the same kind of question of, is security fun? We're not really talking about one thing. We're talking about a whole aggregation of different paths. So I would say that it had better be. It had better be fun, or you should be doing something else. Life is too short to be doing a job that you don't find fun and engaging. You won't be that good at it. It won't be feeding you. I'd say it had better be. And if you can't find any role within corporate security that doesn't interest you, then there are some other paths. There are consulting paths. Often you have to work with corporations when you're doing that. There are peer research paths that might be interesting to you. It's not really a flippant question. It's a great question, because yes, it better be fun, or why even do it? That's another part of that hacker mindset, is there's this kind of edge of irreverence. Hackers really see the absurdity of the system in a way that a lot of us, don't see or don't want to see. And, that kind of irreverence can be really helpful. That's another thing that can really combat that kind of monolithic intimidation. When you see, the emperors aren't necessarily naked, but they're not wearing all the clothes that they maybe should be. I think that's a good kind of frame to hold a lot of this with. Just drop in a few grains of irreverence. But yeah, it should be fun, or why do it?
I think that's a magnificent note to end on. So I wanted to, can we all just take a moment? You can use your reaction emojis, you can blow up the chat, whatever you need to do to properly show appreciation. I know it's hard to really convey it virtually, but just a huge thank you, Chris, for your time, for your insight, for your wisdom. It's been such an honor to get to have this conversation with you.
Thank you. It's been an honor for me too, and I thank you and everybody for their time and attention. It's really a pleasure to connect with this way.
Well, for folks who are joining us. I'm loving reading your chat comments and have loved it all the way through this experience. If you loved hearing from Chris is the lead instructor of our cybersecurity course, designed the course. You can soak up all of his wisdom in our cybersecurity course. Maybe not all of it. I don't want to promise all of your wisdom, Chris, but more of Chris's wisdom and insight and ingenuity.
As much as I can give, yes.
In our cybersecurity course, which is coming up starting February 13th. So more info at codepath.org if you're curious. Emily and Sal are also here from our CodePath team. They're amazing. If you haven't met them, you should stick around just to meet them. But otherwise, wanted to wish everyone just a really wonderful rest of your evening. Stay safe, be well. It's been such a pleasure to have you here, and thank you so much for taking time to join us and to tune in.